Hey everybody, welcome back to Avalon, episode 24, and today's episode we're working on our metro system. So we did work on this pretty recently. We actually built the whole thing 4 episodes ago or something, but that was also like a year ago, and I feel like we could really take better advantage of the metro overhaul mod. We could be using the multi-track segments instead of the single-track segments, and creating more capacity in our downtown area. And I also feel like, especially after visiting some different places and riding different metros, it kind of occurred to me that the original system that we designed, it was all right, like it was fine, but I think I was really focused on coverage. Like I wanted to have as many areas, as many parts of the city as possible hit by different metro stops, but I wasn't really thinking about, when you get on that stop, how are you going to reach other parts of the city, which I think is like really the question you should always be asking yourself whenever you're creating a public transit system is like, okay, if I'm, here in the city, what's the best route to get to some other part of the city using only public transit? And, how effective is my system at doing this from all different parts of the city? And it turns out that the old system that we had just wasn't really that effective. Like there were a lot of lines. I mean, one in particular, there was I think it was the purple line that was like a U-turn basically. And so you could ride it as like a one-way train, but then it just kind of oddly turned around and went the opposite direction, like 4 blocks over, stuff like that, where, from overhead, it looks like it's getting a lot of coverage for the city, but in reality, it's not really actually contributing to getting people to different parts of the city. And so I'm not saying that our old system was bad per se, but I think that this one can be a lot better. So today's episode, we're going to rebuild the metro system, but this is all sort of a part of a much larger plan for the city. So I'd like to redo the underground system. I'd like to build on top of the above ground system. I'd like to actually build a third or a second, underground system, a third train system, but a third deeper train system that's not connected to our current underground. And I'd like to expand our railway system as well. So our railway system in particular, I think is the one that was lacking the most. It was the one that we sort of started building like the beginning of the project forever ago. And I don't know, it's fine, right? I think there was like one connection to the central point downtown. We have pretty good freight access, actually. That's not too bad. But the passenger access I felt like was lacking. And I was not really a fan of the way it was actually getting into the city. There was way too many steep turns, and it didn't really feel like an actual realistic train system. So later in this episode, we'll actually rework that as well. But just for now, we're starting off with the metro system. So the way that I'm looking at this now is I want to connect the central point to as many different sections of the downtown as possible. So you can see we're using this branching technique where I'm really splitting off from the central point. And I'm also trying very deliberately to keep all of these lines kind of moving in parallel to each other. So they do branch out a little bit, but they, for the most part, move all sort of parallel to each other. And this is on purpose because we're going to have the above ground system move in the opposite direction. So, they'll obviously all kind of meet on different key points in the city. So we'll have lots of places where you can transfer from one system to the other. And hopefully with this new design, we'll get a lot better access from any given point in the city to any other given point in the city, and hopefully still the same amount of coverage. So that's sort of what I'm going for here. And you'll notice that I'm even trying to kind of break what we were doing before, which was arbitrarily following roads above, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. We don't necessarily need to follow the grid at all with the metro system. In fact, the whole point is to have as few turns as possible, keep it as straight as possible, or at least as gradual as possible so the trains can go at a reasonable speed. So that's sort of where that design came from. And I know we kind of jumped away from it pretty quick, but we'll come back later in the episode. I'll show you guys the final design for the underground as well as the train system. And I've also gone ahead and drafted this full-on draft of how I want the entire metro and train and above ground metro system to kind of interact. So I'll show that at the end as well. But in the meantime, we're now working on the train system. So you might have noticed that I just deleted a lot of rail there. We took out pretty much that entire section that was running through the city I guess parallel to the current metro system. So it was like making this right angled turn, and it didn't really feel like, you know, the trains have to slow down so much to get into that area, and I didn't really like it too much. So what I decided to do instead is basically create a direct line that goes straight to the central point. And then we also have a split that happens. So we still utilize a lot of that rail. We still go over that same blue bridge that we created a few episodes ago, or more than a few episodes ago. And we also have one more splitting section that goes on the right-hand side of Central Point. So there's kind of 3 forks that happen, or I guess there's one fork that forks in 3 directions as you enter the city. And this will give you access to a future station we're going to have on the other side of the whole city from here. So ideally we'll have 3 different stations, and you'll see this better in the diagram, but we'll have 3 different main stations, and this whole fork here is kind of sending you to all 3 of those stations, and then the track from those stations rejoins after this, going through the city, and then branches off to all the different parts of the rest of the region. So I think this design is going to be much better. And in the process, we got to do a little bit of practice with merging these rail connections and working with elevated rail. I tried my hardest to really keep these gradual, like even more so than the metro system. And more than just gradual, I want these to be very, very smooth, because I think that some of the coolest ways we'll be able to look at Avalon in the future will be through, like, first person rail videos and stuff like that. And I'm really designing a lot of the city around the rails, or at least I'm adding a lot of detail around the areas that have rail. So I think we could have some really cool videos come of this. So I'd like these to be like perfectly flat, perfectly smooth. And when they do have slopes, they're like, calculated gradual slopes. And you'll see I'm actually going to use a couple new tools here. One of them, what I just used, is it's a Move It tool that I think is probably not actually that new. It's probably been around for a while now, but it's like it's a way to create a gradual slope between 2 points. So if you select all of those nodes in between and then select the points on either side, then you can create a nice gradual slope between them. And this is like incredible. This is like the greatest discovery that I've made that has existed probably forever, but I just wasn't even using it. I was trying to like manually create these for so long, and I think this has been around for probably a good couple months now, and I just didn't even know about it. But if you weren't aware, this I don't know what it's called, like linear. I think it's called like linear curve between points or something along those lines. But it's one of the new tools in Move It under the Align Heights kind of like little caret thing that expands and lets you pick different tools and stuff. And I definitely think this is like one of the most useful ones. But there are some other really useful tools as well I've been using quite a bit. I also played around a lot with merging these tracks. I don't know. I mean, I haven't really worked with this in a while, and so while I feel pretty comfortable using Move It to make nice, smooth, road connections, I haven't really done it with rail. And I think I found a pretty good method for doing it here with this one. You can see I'm really pulling these nodes far apart and creating very long merging segments, and that seems to be, it seems to be the best way to do it for now anyway. I'm aware that there's still yet a better way to do this, and it's a mod called like Re-Rail or something like that, but it's basically like a total overhaul for the rails in the same way that the Metro overhaul mod is an overhaul for the Metros. The only thing that I don't like about it is, well, first of all, I don't understand it, and it's just hard to like, I don't know. I guess it means I got to learn something new, so that's probably not a very good reason not to use it. But the other thing is that you need to actually download custom tracks, and you need to replace a lot of the tracks, and it's very dependent on lots of custom content. And again, this isn't like a very good excuse to not use it. I'm seeing the hypocrisy, right? I am using Metro Overhaul mod, which is essentially the same thing, but it seems to add custom content dependencies and a little more complication than I'd like to deal with for our railways. So I'm not like dead set on not using it, but I felt like I could kind of achieve what I wanted right now with the current setup, so I didn't install it. But that could change. We'll see. I think I could be convinced to use it. It's just, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if we use it in the future. But for now, I think we got some pretty good looking rails. And I did also try to connect all three of those, I guess the forks. So the three places that the fork goes. I connected all of those in a reasonable manner. So, gradual enough that trains could travel at a high speed, I guess. But I wouldn't really anticipate that the trains would actually take these connecting routes all that often. I'd imagine that they probably come in from an outer area, they fork into whichever station they're going to, and then they fork back out and leave again. But I figure it's probably just safe to have connections from every point to every other point, just so we have the option to connect all these different stations together. I'm gonna have a direct connection between the two larger stations outside of the central station at some point, so we can actually have trains running that route. But for the central point, all of the metros, the below ground and above ground, are going directly to these new stations, so there's not really much of a point in actually adding the trains. But anyway, we're pretty much at the end of the episode now, so I'm gonna real quick pull up my rough draft of the new transit system. And I know that static images on YouTube are super boring, so I'll be pretty quick with this, but the plan for the future is to develop 3 different metro systems and 1 solid train system. So the orange is our train system. You can see we've already developed most of the train system, pretty much all the way up to the 2 stations at this point. The yellow system is the above ground metro system, and we've only really developed like 1 branch of it, and that's the one that goes straight through Central Point and the downtown area. So this will be acting as sort of like a loop all around the outer parts of the city. We've got the dark gray. That's just the regular metro system. You can already see the tunnels we built this episode, and then some minor tweaks and expansions coming off of them. And then we've got this purple system, which is a totally separate underground system that is even lower down into the ground than our current metro system. And this one is really just like it was a solution to a problem we had, where we have this above ground system that is doing these crisscrossing, it's acting as the opposite, the perpendicular to our current metro system, but it's sort of missing coverage in certain areas. And I felt like specifically there were some key areas of the city that really needed to be hit by, or at least accessible from other parts of the city. In particular, that new train system, or the new train station on the bottom right, really needs access to a bunch of different areas, including some of the core downtown areas and some soon-to-be very bustling downtown areas. So I've sort of plotted out these key junctions with all these little blue dots, so you can see where we're going to have lots of these different systems all sort of coming together, and there'll be like transfer points between the systems, I guess is a way you could say that. So that's the plan for the future. So we're going to jump into the new station next episode. It won't be the main rail hub, it'll be the lower rail hub we saw earlier, and even though it's not going to be as big as the main rail hub, it's going to be very big. Like, this is probably one of the biggest rail stations I've ever built, and it'll be kind of fun to not only build this one really large, but then build the next one even larger. But I would anticipate this being a couple episodes at the very least, and I would really anticipate this whole overhaul of the whole transit system to take many episodes. I mean, we'll probably end up just kind of slowly implementing this over time as we build new parts of the city, but I think this was a very welcome and necessary thing to add in, so that's the plan going forward, I guess. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we'll come back next time and work on the new train station. So hope you enjoyed, and as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.